I was 15 years old when I accepted what sounded like the easiest babysitting job I had ever been offered. Looking back now, there is one moment I still can't explain. The moment I realized someone inside that house was watching me long before I knew he was there. That summer, I was always searching for ways to make extra money. Since I was too young for most regular jobs, I usually babysat for neighbors or family friends. It wasn't exciting work, but it paid. One afternoon, while scrolling through Craigslist during summer break, I came across an ad that immediately caught my attention. A woman explained that she worked overnight shifts and needed someone to stay at her house with her 6-year-old daughter, Rose. According to the post, Rose would already be asleep before the babysitter arrived and would remain asleep throughout most of the night. The pay was surprisingly high. I emailed the woman and received a response about an hour later. That evening, she called me. Her voice was calm and friendly. She answered every question without hesitation. She explained that she would already be at work when I arrived, so she planned to leave a key hidden outside. She even described the exact location where I would find it. Since I was only 15, my mom insisted on speaking with her first. The two talked on the phone for several minutes. Whatever was discussed seemed to satisfy my mother because afterward she shrugged and said, "Sounds legitimate to me." The job was scheduled for the following night. At around 9:30 p.m., my mom drove me to the address. The house sat near the end of a dead-end street about 20 minutes from where we lived. Large trees surrounded the property, their branches stretching over the driveway like dark arms. The neighborhood itself was quiet, almost too quiet. As we pulled in, I noticed every light in the house was on. My mom waited in the driveway while I walked to the porch and checked the hiding spot. The key was exactly where the woman said it would be. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. After setting down my backpack, I turned and waved as my mom backed out of the driveway. A few seconds later, her headlights disappeared. Then I was completely alone, or at least I thought I was. The silence inside the house felt strangely heavy. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Family photographs covered the walls. Children's drawings hung from the refrigerator with colorful magnets. A pink backpack leaned against a dining chair. Several toys were scattered near the living room couch. It looked like a typical family home. Still, I wanted to familiarize myself with the layout before settling in for the night. The kitchen connected to a hallway that led towards several bedrooms. I slowly walked down it, glancing into rooms as I passed. Then I looked through an open doorway on my right and froze. A man was standing inside. He wasn't moving. He wasn't reading. He wasn't watching television. He was simply standing beside the window, staring outside into the darkness. The sight immediately unsettled me because there was absolutely nothing to see. Beyond the glass was only blackness. I stood there for several seconds. Then I cleared my throat. The man turned. The first thing I noticed was his smile. The second thing I noticed was that one of his front teeth was missing. Who are you?" I asked. His smile never changed. He didn't answer. Not a single word. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I backed away from the doorway and quickly pulled out my phone. The woman answered after several rings. I explained that there was a man inside one of the bedrooms. For a moment, she sounded genuinely confused. Then, almost as if she had suddenly remembered something important, she said, "Oh, right. That's my brother." The pause before her explanation bothered me more than anything else. She told me he suffered from dementia and occasionally wandered around at night. According to her, he was harmless. That information did not make me feel better. If another adult lived in the house, especially one with dementia, why hadn't she mentioned him in the advertisement, or during our phone conversation, or while talking to my mother? Before hanging up, she casually told me to help myself to anything in the refrigerator and reminded me that the guest room was at the end of the hallway. After the call ended, I stood there replaying the conversation. Something felt off. I couldn't explain why. Eventually, I continued down the hallway. The room where I had seen the man remained open, but the man himself was gone. And somehow, that was even worse. The farther I walked down the hallway, the more uncomfortable I became. There were 4 doors before the guest room. I tried the first. Locked. The second. Locked. The third. Locked. By then, my nerves were already beginning to fray. The 4th door opened slightly before stopping against something. I peered through the narrow gap. Darkness. I pushed a little harder. The room appeared empty. After seeing nothing unusual, I felt embarrassed. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the woman's explanation was completely true. I continued toward the guest room. As I passed through the kitchen again, something on the refrigerator caught my attention. The children's drawings looked old. Not slightly old, very old. The paper had yellowed around the edges. Dust rested on top of one of the magnets. The colors had faded. I looked around again. The pink backpack seemed worn and sun-bleached. The toys looked neglected. A strange thought crossed my mind. When was the last time a child had actually lived here? I had been inside the house for nearly 30 minutes. I hadn't heard Rose. I hadn't seen Rose. I hadn't found her bedroom. I hadn't seen a single recent sign of a 6-year-old child. The realization settled over me like a weight. When I finally reached the guest room, I stepped inside and set my backpack on the floor. The room was small but clean. Then I noticed something else. There was no lock on the door. A chill ran through me. I turned back toward the hallway, and there he was again, the man, standing at the opposite end, watching me. I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't heard a door open. He was simply there. The same unsettling smile stretched across his face. The missing tooth was visible even from a distance. For several long seconds, neither of us moved. The hallway seemed impossibly silent. I found myself wondering how long he had been standing there before I noticed him. 10 seconds? A minute? Longer? The thought made my skin crawl. Finally, I stepped into the room and shut the door. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I tried to calm myself. I knew what dementia could do to people. My great-grandmother had suffered from it before she passed away. I kept repeating that fact in my head. But no matter how many rational explanations I came up with, the same feeling remained. Something about this situation wasn't right. And deep down, I knew it. I called my mom. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. By the third attempt, she finally picked up. The relief I felt hearing her voice was immediate. I told her everything. The strange man. The fact that nobody had mentioned him beforehand. The locked bedrooms. The missing child. The increasingly uncomfortable feeling that had settled over the entire house. When I finished speaking, there was silence on the line. Several seconds passed. Then my mom said something that instantly made my pulse quicken. "I'm coming to get you." She didn't tell me I was imagining things. She didn't tell me to stay calm. She didn't tell me I was being paranoid. She simply said she was on her way. That reaction frightened me almost as much as the situation itself. If my mom thought something was wrong, maybe I wasn't overreacting after all. After hanging up, I sat quietly on the bed and listened. A few minutes passed. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming down the hallway. Each step seemed louder than the last. My entire body tensed. The footsteps continued approaching. Closer, 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 until they stopped directly outside the guest room door. Silence. I stared at the doorknob. Nothing moved. The air felt frozen. I checked my phone. The woman still hadn't called. She hadn't checked in once. I tried calling her myself. No answer. I called again. Nothing. A third time. Still nothing. Then, without warning, the bedroom door slowly opened a few inches. I couldn't see who was standing outside. The gap wasn't wide enough. The door remained cracked open, waiting. Whoever had opened it never entered, never spoke, never moved. I sat frozen on the bed, staring at that narrow opening. Every instinct in my body was screaming that I needed to leave. The longer I watched that partially open door, the stronger that feeling became. Finally, I made a decision. I wasn't staying another second. I got off the bed, moved to the window, and pushed it open as quietly as possible. The night air rushed inside. Without hesitating, I climbed out. I dropped into the backyard and started running. I didn't stop until I reached the street. Even then, I kept moving. My shoes pounded against the pavement as I crossed to the opposite side and continued farther away from the house. Only after reaching nearly the next block did I finally slow down. My heart was hammering. Every few seconds, I looked over my shoulder. The house remained visible in the distance beneath the glow of its lights. Everything appeared normal. Too normal. Breathing hard, I pulled out my phone to call my mom again and tell her exactly where I was. Before I could dial, a text message appeared. The sender was the woman. For a moment, I felt relieved. Then I opened the message. It contained only 4 words. "Where are you going?" I stared at the screen. My stomach dropped. I slowly looked back toward the house. No one stood outside. No curtains moved. No figures appeared in the windows. I hadn't noticed security cameras when I arrived. I hadn't told anyone I was leaving. Yet somehow she knew. The realization sent another wave of fear through me. At that moment, I became convinced that something was seriously wrong. I immediately called my mom. When she answered, I told her not to drive directly to the house. Instead, I asked her to pick me up farther down the street. She agreed without question. The next 10 minutes felt endless. Every passing second, I expected to see someone coming down the road. The smiling man, the woman, anyone, but nobody appeared. Finally, my mother's car turned the corner. I practically jumped inside before she had fully stopped. The doors locked, the engine accelerated, and we left. Neither of us ever contacted the woman again. To this day, I still don't know who that man really was. I don't know why so many bedrooms were locked. I don't know why the signs of a child's presence seemed years old. Most importantly, I never learned whether Rose actually existed. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. Maybe the woman was telling the truth. Maybe I panicked and abandoned an ordinary babysitting job. But after everything that happened that night, I find that explanation hard to believe. Because even now, years later, one thought still lingers in the back of my mind. Something strange was happening inside that house. And I got out before finding out what it was.